What happens when someone who thinks they control everything suddenly meets someone who doesn't flinch? The yellow school bus exhaled steam as it hissed to a stop in front of Madison West High, its rusting doors folding open with a groan. It was the first Monday of fall, and the air was crisp, sunlight cutting through maple trees, casting long shadows on the brick pathway leading to the school. Students spilled out in groups, laughing, jostling, already fitting into their pre-drawn cliques like puzzle pieces. No one noticed. The last student to step off the bus, Sarai James, 17, kept her backpack slung over one shoulder, her posture relaxed but deliberate. She wore no makeup, no flashy sneakers, and her expression betrayed nothing. Her dark brown eyes scanned the building ahead with quiet calculation, her lips pressed into a firm line. She wasn't scared. She wasn't excited. She wasn't even hopeful. She was focused. This wasn't her first school. It wasn't even her third. Sarai had moved from Chicago 2 months ago, after a fight that landed someone in the ER and nearly destroyed her record. Only her father's deep connections in the martial arts community and her own silence had kept her from being labeled a threat. Here in Madison, no one knew her past, and she intended to keep it that way. Finish senior year, stay invisible, no fights, no drama, no slips. That was the plan. And the halls of Madison West buzzed with noise. Lockers slamming, bells ringing, and the chatter of hundreds of teenagers who had already claimed their social territory. As Sarai stepped through the glass door, she felt it immediately. The glance that lingered too long. The whispered curiosity that followed a face they hadn't seen before. Being the new girl was always an invitation, but being the quiet new black girl in a predominantly white school, that was a target. She didn't respond. She didn't even make eye contact. Her walk was fluid, unbothered, like she'd done this a dozen times before. Which, in truth, she had. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of locker 317 as she turned the dial on the combination. Then she heard the laughter. Not hers. Not warm, not shared. It was performative, calculated. Sarai didn't need to look to know who it was. Chloe Whitmore, 17, queen of the campus, stood surrounded by her court. Madeline and Erin, 2 girls who mimicked her every move like shadows. Chloe wasn't just popular, she was feared. The kind of girl who could ruin reputations with a well-timed whisper, or turn a cafeteria into a courtroom with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. Next to them were the boys. Blake Whitmore, 18, Chloe's older brother and the school's starting quarterback. And Damian Lopez, lean, wiry, and always smirking. He didn't care if his jokes hurt. He liked when they did. Sarai knew this type. She had no intention of becoming their entertainment. She turned back to her locker, but Chloe had seen her. And Chloe never looked at someone unless she was thinking of ways to turn them into an accessory or an example. The morning bell rang. Sarai slipped into her first class. Eyes followed her. Whispers trailed behind. Someone muttered, "She's from Chicago. Probably tough, right?" Another laughed. She ignored them. At lunch, Sarai sat alone, in the farthest corner of the cafeteria. Not because she was afraid, because she preferred control. She always sat with her back to the wall. She always scanned the exits. Years of being taught to protect herself had become second nature. She was not scared. She was aware. That was when Chloe moved. Smooth, confident, fake-friendly, she sauntered up with her entourage like a lioness who knew the crowd was watching. Her voice dripped sugar. "Hey there, new girl," she said. "Didn't think you'd want to eat all alone." Sarai didn't respond. Madame laughed. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," Ern added. "Or maybe she thinks she's better than us." "Yeah," Damien whistled. Blake chuckled. and leaned against the table beside her. Then Chloe reached forward and flicked over Sarai's juice cup. It spilled. Jeff. A prank. A signal. And the entire cafeteria saw it. Their eyes stared at the mess. She didn't frown. She didn't sigh. She didn't speak. She simply stood, picked up her tray, and walked to the trash can, calm, silent, unshaken. And in that moment, a ripple went through the room. Not laughter, not quite, something else. Now, Chloe had expected tears, or rage, maybe even shame. But what she got was a silence that said, "You don't scare me." Sarai looked over her shoulder, met Chloe's eyes, and smiled. Not wide, not smug, just enough. This was the kind of smile you remember when everything else goes quiet. And for the first time in a long time, Chloe Whitmore didn't feel in control. Now, before we dive into the full story, I want to ask you, genuinely, find a quiet place, grab a glass of water, sit back. Because this story isn't just about high school drama. It's about power, about silence, about how sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that speak last. You're about to witness the unraveling of a system ruled by fear and the quiet storm that no one saw coming. Ready? The bell at Madison West High shrieked like a warning siren, a sharp metallic cry that echoed down the packed hallways. It was lunchtime, the 1 hour in the school day where the social hierarchy paraded itself most clearly. Tables weren't just furniture, they were territory. And today, something invisible had shifted. Sarai James, the 17-year-old transfer from Chicago, carried her lunch tray like a shield, her steps steady, unhurried, uninterested. She wasn't new to this game, though she never played by its rules. The cafeteria was loud, the kind of loud that echoes against walls and rattles beneath the fluorescent lights. But Sarai walked through it all as if the noise bent around her. She chose her seat the way she did everything else, with precision. Back corner, wall at her back, exit in view. Isolation wasn't a weakness for her. It was sanctuary. Across the room, Chloe Whitmore watched. The queen bee. Blonde, calculated, powerful. She sat at the central table, what the students jokingly called the throne, flanked by Madeline and Aaron, her shadows in designer sneakers. They laughed easily, a little too loudly, their eyes locked on Sarai like wolves pretending to be amused. But Chloe wasn't laughing now, not really. Her smirk was a little too thin, her posture a little too upright. Yesterday, the new girl hadn't played her role. No tearful exit, no scene, just a silent walk to the trash can and a look that had unnerved her. "She thinks she's tough," Aaron murmured beside her. "Or she's stupid," Madeline added, stabbing her salad with a plastic fork. Chloe didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on Sarai, studying her. Because something felt off. No one walked away from Chloe Whitmore. No one ignored her and kept their social bones intact. Yet, Sarai had. And worse, people noticed. Whispers had started, before first period even ended. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink, bro. "I heard she's from the south side of Chicago, like real deal fighter type." She just walked away, cold. The stories grew as they always did in high school, exaggerated, mutated, glorified, but the energy, that was real. And it terrified Chloe. At Sarai's table, there was no noise. She ate like the room didn't exist. Fork to food, food to mouth, methodical, calm. But her ears heard everything. Every step behind her, every laugh that changed pitch, every whisper that dropped just low enough to feel threatening. She felt it before she saw them. A presence, a shift in air pressure. Then a voice, all sugary venom. Well, look what we have here, Chloe cooed, her heels clicking as she stopped beside Sarai's table. Still playing the mute act? Sarai didn't move. Not her head, not her hand, not even her breath. Aaron giggled behind her. Madeline chimed in, maybe she's just slow. Damien, Like's ever-grinning best friend, leaned on the back of a nearby chair, letting out a low whistle. Maybe she doesn't even speak English. The cafeteria's buzz thinned. People stopped chewing. Phones tilted just slightly in the air, cameras angled to catch whatever was about to go down. The stage was set. Chloe leaned closer, her voice softer now. You know what happens to girls like you when they don't learn their place? Yes. Still no response. Well, she knocked over Sarai's juice. There it spilled, like blood on white rice. Bright, a sudden, staining. The cafeteria gasped. Chloe stood over her, confident, certain she had just punctured Sarai's armor. But the moment froze when Sarai set her fork down, wiped her hands slowly with a napkin, and rose without a word. She didn't look at Chloe. She didn't give her audience a single flinch. She walked to the trash, dumped her tray, and exited. Behind her, the laughter didn't rise. It stalled, cracked, struggled, and when she turned her head slightly, just enough for Chloe to catch her eyes, there it was again. That same look. No fear. Nobody. Just silence. Coiled. Waiting. Chloe felt something tighten in her chest. And for the first time in her perfectly controlled social reign, she felt doubt. Later that day, the whispers multiplied. She didn't even react. Dude, I think she wanted it to happen. That girl's dangerous. By gym, period. The tension was undeniable. Sarai could feel the hallway split around her. The predator-prey dynamic had flipped, and the queen bee didn't know how to cope. So Chloe escalated. During dodgeball, Madeline and Aaron accidentally slammed into her 3 times. In the locker room, Chloe left a note on her bench. Chicago trash doesn't belong here. Sarai didn't respond. Not with words. Not with anger. Not even with raised eyebrows. And that drove Chloe mad. Because silence wasn't surrender. Silence was a threat. That night, in her bedroom, Chloe stared at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Every replay of the cafeteria moment felt like a glitch in the matrix, a moment where she wasn't the one writing the script. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was unraveling. Tomorrow, she'd fix it. Tomorrow, she would remind everyone who held the crown. She didn't know it yet, but the crown had already cracked, and Sarai James, silent, steady, relentless, was the weight that made it crumble. It wasn't the noise that unsettled her. It was the waiting. The morning after the juice cup incident, the air at Madison West High felt heavier. Hallways were no longer filled with idle chatter, but with speculation wrapped in glances and half-formed whispers. It wasn't just about Sarai James anymore. It was about what she might do. As Rico Choops, Sarai walked through the main hallway with her usual stillness, every step measured like a pianist playing a familiar slow sonata. Her shoes echoed softly on the linoleum. Students shifted out of her way, not with fear, but with curiosity wrapped in tension. Like a deer in the woods, who isn't sure if the rustle behind the tree is wind or wolf. Near locker 317, she turned the dial calmly. Her face, unreadable as ever, didn't reveal the storm building beneath. Across the hall, Chloe Whitmore leaned against a locker, arms crossed, lips tight, her eyes narrowed on Sarai's back. Flanking her, as always, were Madeline and Aaron, though even they had stopped smiling. "She's walking like she owns this place," Madeline muttered. "She hasn't said a word since yesterday," Aaron added. "She doesn't have to," Chloe said flatly, her voice like glass, shiny, cold, and breakable. "She thinks that silence makes her strong." Madeline tried to laugh. It didn't land. That afternoon, in gym class, the tension snapped. Its first thread. Basket all day. The bleachers were half filled with students pretending to stretch but really waiting to see what the new girl would do. Sarai stood on the court in her standard black sneakers, her braid tied back tight, her eyes tracking the ball like a hawk, perched on a ledge. Blake Whitmore, captain of the boys' team, clapped his hands. "Pick-up game," he said. "Let's make it fun." Damian Lopez grinned. "Let's see if Chicago can hoop." Teams were formed, and like clockwork, Sarah ended up matched with Blake, Damian, and two other jocks on the opposing side. The game began. It wasn't settled, it was a war with a vaught. Each time Sarai got possession, Damian bumped her hard. Blake shoved past her shoulder with a sneer. Once, as she leapt for a rebound, Blake's elbow clipped her ribs. Sharp, deliberate. She landed hard. The air knocked from her lungs, her palms slapping the polished wood floor with a flat crack. The gym went quiet. She lay there for one breath. Then two. Then she pushed herself up slowly, eyes steady. She didn't glare. She didn't speak. She just stood, picked up the ball, passed it, and kept playing. Another shove, another smirk. Still she didn't respond until the final play. The ball hit the court and bounced toward the sideline. Damian reached for it. Sarai darted forward and got there first. She pivoted, spun, textbook precision, and launched a clean shot into the basket. But Damian wasn't done. As she turned away, he shoved her hard, catching her off balance. She stumbled. "Ow!" She didn't fall, but the moment slowed, stretched, the way glass stretches right before it snaps. Neri took a breath, a long one. Then she turned, walked up to Damian. Her voice was low, steady, almost a whisper, but it rang across the gym like a church bell. "You don't push people because you're strong. You push them because you're scared of who they are when they don't fight back." Damian blinked. No smirk, just stillness. The gym held its breath. That night, in her room, Sarai sat on her bed, legs crossed, staring at the wall. A single strip of afternoon sun bled across her floor. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was tired. Tired of being the story people whispered about. Tired of holding the line. Tired of being the girl who had to prove she wasn't dangerous just because she didn't snap. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "You don't start fights, baby girl. But if you finish one, make sure nobody ever wants to start another." Mrs. Tramway, she closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she knew, they'd push again. Strange. The next morning was colder. In the hallway, Madeline brushed past her, too hard for it to be accidental. Chloe was at her locker, scribbling something onto a pink slip of paper. She folded it, passed it to a sophomore, and whispered something. Within 20 minutes, Sarai's name was in every mouth. "They're planning something today. It's going to happen after school, behind the gym." just gonna get jumped. But Sarai didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. He just kept walking. After lunch, in the empty hallway, Chloe waited by the art wing alone. Sarai walked by on her way to study hall. As she passed, Chloe spoke without turning. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're not mad?" Sarai stopped and then slowly turned. Walked right up to her. Was no one else around. Just the humming of a flickering light above, casting shifting shadows across their faces. Sarai looked her dead in the eyes. "I'm not pretending." She stepped closer. "I'm saving it." And she stepped back, walked away. And Chloe, for the first time, wasn't sure if she was predator or prey. Deuced into the parking area. The sky over Madison West turned a shade darker that afternoon, as if the sun itself knew what was coming and chose to dim its light in quiet solidarity. The air, unusually still, carried an electricity that made lockers slam louder, footsteps sharper, breaths shorter. A storm was coming, and everyone could feel it. By noon, the whispers had stopped whispering. They had become declarations. "She's gonna bite. No way she's walking. We get. It's happening behind the gym. Final bell." But Sarai James? She moved like the eye of the storm. Unmoving. Unflinching. As students rehearsed algebra formulas and reviewed history timelines, Sarai sat in her final class with her notebook closed, her hands folded on top. She wasn't reading, she wasn't thinking, she was listening to her breath, her pulse, to the silence inside herself that had stopped being peace and started becoming preparation. A girl across the room glanced at her, then looked away just as fast. Respect, curiosity, fear. It was hard to tell them apart now. Behind Sarai, Damien scribbled something on a folded note and passed it to Blake. Blake didn't smile. He just read, crumpled it, and flicked it into the trash without looking. He cracked his knuckles. Loud, sharp, unnecessary. They were getting ready, but so was she. The final bell. It rang at 3:10 p.m., but it might as well have been a war drum. Students poured out like they always did, but this time, a current pulled them toward the back of the school instead of the buses, toward the gym, toward the crack in the asphalt where the weeds broke through the concrete. The spot where lines were crossed and names remembered. Sarai didn't rush. She closed her locker softly, adjusted the strap on her backpack. Walked. Every step was deliberate. She turned the corner, and they were waiting. Chloe Whitmore stood in the middle, arms folded, jaw set. Madeline and Aaron at her sides like shadows stuck to fear. Blake Whitmore to the right, towering, eyes scanning the crowd like a lion in a broken cage. Damien next to him, phone already out, camera lens gleaming like a weapon. 20 students, maybe 30, forming a loose circle, phones ready, hearts pounding. Sarai walked through the ring without flinching. He stopped, 5 feet from Chloe. She didn't look around. She didn't speak. He just was. And that presence alone bent the air. Chloe's smirk faltered before it even formed, but she had gone too far to step back now. "So," she said, arms still crossed, "are we done pretending you're harmless?" Sarai raised an eyebrow. "Barely," then answered, "We're not here because I'm dangerous. We're here because you needed someone to be scared of." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe clenched her fists. Blake stepped forward, trying to steal the tension. "I think she's scared," he said to no one in particular. "Look at her. Not even talking now." He took a step closer. "You should have stayed in Chicago." Sarai's body didn't move, but something in her shifted, subtle, deep, final. She dropped her backpack. The sound it made was soft, but the silence that followed it was deafening. A second later, Blake swung. Fist. Fast, wide, and it never connected. In one motion, Sarai moved inside his arm, caught his wrist, twisted his momentum, and dropped him. Flat onto the asphalt. Gasps exploded. Phones shook in hands. Blake groaned, stunned. Wind knocked out of him, face to gravel. Damien yelled, "Yo, what the?" and lunged. But Sarai didn't wait. She sidestepped, ducked under, and grabbed Damien's hoodie mid-charge. She pivoted, flipped him clean over her hip, and he hit the ground with a dull thud that silenced every thought. The Sarpotin chair had laughed. It held its breath. "Chloe?" She froze. Her mouth parted. Her knees locked. This wasn't humiliation. This was revelation in Sarai. She just stood there, breathing steady, hands loose at her sides. She didn't gloat. She didn't taunt. She didn't even blink. Then she looked at Chloe and walked toward her. One step. Chloe took a step back. Sarai didn't stop. 4, 5, and she stopped. Inches from her. The girl who'd started it all. The girl who had everything. Until now. Denar's voice was low, like thunder under skin. "You tried to turn me into a warning. Now and with that, she turned, left Chloe standing there, her power scattered like ash in the wind. The next morning, the silence in Madison West was no longer anticipation. It was aftermath. Sarai James walked through the front doors with her hoodie up, braid tucked low and her hands buried deep in her pockets. But there was no hiding her. Not anymore. Students stepped aside, not like before, with fear or rumor, but with something else. Something slower. Something like awe. She wasn't just the girl who fought back. She was the girl who didn't need to prove anything until she did, and when she did, no one forgot. Whispers still moved, but now they carried respect. Sarai heard her name pass between lips like a secret being honored instead of gossiped. She took Blake down like nothing. Damien didn't even see it coming. Did you see her walk away? Like, he didn't even shake her. Sarai didn't respond. She never did. But her steps were firmer now, not heavier, just anchored. In the cafeteria, Chloe sat at her usual table, but the shape of the world around her had changed. The air didn't cling to her anymore. It drifted past her like she wasn't there. Madeline and Aaron were quieter. Their smiles didn't snap into place so easily. Blake wasn't at lunch. Damien sat 2 tables over, earbuds in, head down. There was no laughter, no jeering, just the sound of metal utensils and shifting trays. Chloe stared at her tray. The food sat untouched, congealed at the edges. Her fork hovered above it, unsure. For the first time, she wasn't surrounded by certainty. Across the room, Sarai sat alone as always, but today, people glanced toward her with something else in their eyes. Possibility. A sophomore with a physics book paused near her table, like he might ask to join. The girl from the basketball team nodded silently as she passed. But Sarai didn't return their looks. She didn't need to. She wasn't trying to take the throne. She had already dismantled the entire idea of one. That night, back home, the house was quiet. Sarai sat at the kitchen table, her knuckles pressed against the cool wood. Her father, Darius, poured himself a cup of coffee behind her. His footsteps were steady, slow, the kind that didn't rush because they didn't need to. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. He sat across from her, arms crossed, mug between his hands. Sarai finally spoke. I didn't want it to go that far. Darius nodded. But you knew it would. She looked up, the weight of yesterday still tightening around her shoulders, like a heavy coat she couldn't shrug off. I didn't even hit them hard, she said, voice quiet. He let out a breath through his nose. Not a sigh, just air. Release. Doesn't take force to break a system, just precision. Sarah's hands tightened slightly, then released. Later that night, she went to the garage. The punching bag still hung in the far corner, a little dusty but always ready. She stepped up, still in her hoodie, and stared at it. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She breathed, then stepped in. Jab, cross, elbow. Each strike was fluid, clean, sharp. Not angry, not wild. Control, with memory. Then, when the bag swung back, she did something unexpected. She stopped it with her palm, and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, I'm not afraid of who I was. I'm afraid of who they make me become, if I forget. Meanwhile, across town, Chloe lay in bed wide awake, phone clutched in hand, screen dimmed but not dark. She scrolled through video after video. Students replaying the moment Sarai dropped Blake, flicked Damien, walked away. Every angle, every caption, and every single one told the same story. That she had lost. Not just a fight. She had lost control. Her name used to ring with weight. Now it whispered like dust. She turned off the phone. Rolled over. In pride. For the first time in years, the cafeteria at Madison West had never been this quiet. Not even during fire drills. Not even during exams. It wasn't silence out of fear anymore. It was reflection. Every table, every glance, every word felt different. The hierarchy that had once dictated who sat where, who laughed loudest, who went invisible, it was gone. Like someone had pulled a wire from behind the walls and the whole system short-circuited. And in the center of that void sat Sarai James. She hadn't moved tables. She hadn't changed her seat, but the energy around her had shifted, like gravity bending towards something unmoved. Students glanced, nodded, lingered, but they didn't crowd her. No one dared. Because Sarai hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't claimed territory. She simply endured. And in doing so, she redefined strength. The faculty noticed. Even if they didn't say it aloud, they moved differently too. More watchful, more alert. One teacher paused longer than usual at the classroom door. Another casually asked Sarai if everything was okay. Not because she suspected trouble, but because she didn't know what else to do. Change, when it begins, is awkward. And Madison West was beginning to change. That Thursday, the school announced a community reflection assembly. The rumor was that it was about addressing conflict and culture, but everyone knew it was about her. Still, no one said Sarai's name out loud. Not until she walked onto the stage. Principal Meyer introduced the event, her voice tight with the kind of nervous hope only adults feel when they try to control something already too big for them. Then she handed the mic to Sarai. For a moment, the gymnasium was filled with nothing but breathing. Sarai stood at center court, alone under the lights. She didn't hold the mic like she was ready to perform. She held it like it was heavier than it looked. She looked out at the bleachers, not scanning for allies or enemies, just looking. And then she spoke. I didn't come here to bite anyone. I came here to graduate quietly. But you don't always get to choose how people see you. Sometimes they decide before you even speak. A pause. No one moved. I've been taught my whole life how to fight. But no one ever taught me how to walk away. That part I had to figure out on my own. She turned slightly, voice lower now. Strength isn't how loud you yell. It's how deeply you listen. Then she set the mic down, on the ground. Didn't hand it back. Didn't wait for applause. She just walked off stage. That one act, the setting down of the mic, was more powerful than any speech. Because it wasn't a performance. It was a boundary. And it said everything. Later that day, in the hallway, by the vending machines, Chloe Whitmore leaned against a cold tile wall, arms folded. She watched Sarai pass, their eyes meeting for the first time since the fight. There was no defiance in Chloe anymore, no fire, just something else, something unfamiliar. She stepped forward. "Sarai," she said, barely louder than a breath. Sarai stopped, turned. They stood 3 feet apart. "I don't know how to say sorry for all of it," Chloe said, voice trembling just once. Sarai didn't speak. Not at first. Then she nodded, once. "Then don't say it. And just stop repeating it." You pause. Then Sarai turned and walked away. And Chloe just stood there, holding the weight of what it meant to be forgiven without being excused. That evening, Sarah sat on her front steps, knees drawn up to her chest, watching the sun fall behind the houses. The sky was purple, edged in amber, like a bruise healing in the sky. Her father came outside, mug of tea in hand. He handed it to her wordlessly. They sat together. No conversation. Just breath and present. And for the first time in weeks, Sarai let herself lean her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Amber, there bros of play." Jazz. A daughter. 2 weeks had passed since the fight behind the gym, but the echo still hadn't faded. Madison West was no longer the same. Something deep, something unspoken, had been rewritten. Like the rules of a game everyone had been playing without realizing, and suddenly someone had thrown the board away. And Sarai James? She had never spoken louder than when she chose silence. It started small. Someone taped a note to Sarai's locker. Not a threat, not a joke, just a message. "Thank you. No name. No explanation. Just 2 words." The next day, it was a drawing. Charcoal on paper. A sketch of her standing in the center of a broken circle. Then came the conversation. Quiet at first, between 2 students near the lockers. "Maybe we should start something, you know? Like actually talk about this stuff? Like a forum?" "Yeah." Anonymous. Just space to be real. By the end of the week, posters went up around school. Voices unheard, a student-led listening group. Broom 18. Thursdays. Come as you are. Speak if you want. Listen if you can. No teachers, no agenda. Just honesty. At the first meeting, 5 students showed up. By the 3rd week, there were 32. And Sarai? She never spoke. She sat in the corner, hands folded, listening. My Gabbard, always listening. In English class, a girl named Asha read a poem about not knowing where she belonged. Her voice cracked halfway through. She almost stopped. And until Sarai, without a word, reached across the desk and touched her wrist. Gently, Asha finished the poem. That moment would ripple across the school like light on water. Then came the assembly, not the kind the school hosted. A student-run event, named with purpose. No more shadows? Sarai sat in the audience that time. Let others take the mic. A freshman spoke about being Asian American and feeling invisible until last month. A senior boy talked about what it meant to be gay on a football team. A girl with vitiligo removed her hoodie mid-speech and said, "I'm done hiding." The crowd didn't cheer. It didn't erupt. It held. It breathed. It felt. Afterward, Sarai stayed behind. She walked up to the center of the stage, empty now, dimly lit. She didn't take the mic. She didn't need it. She simply stood, closed her eyes, took one breath, and bowed. One deep, deliberate bow to the realm, to the silence, to the voice in all of them that had finally found its way out. It was a Thursday afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the windows. A gray day, soft and slow. Chloe Whitmore walked into room 108, alone. She sat near the back. Don't sleep. Didn't need to. Halfway through the session, Sarai entered. She paused at the door, saw Chloe, then walked over, pulled a chair beside her, and sat down. Not in confrontation, not in triumph, but in witness. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They just sat, side by side, in the space they had broken open, and somehow begun to rebuild. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't raising your voice. It's making space for others to raise theirs. Friday afternoon. The sky stretched open in soft gold, the kind of light that didn't shout, but wrapped everything in warmth. The last bell had rung. Students spilled from the classrooms like birds set free, laughter and movement returning to Madison West, like a season they thought they had lost. But something had changed. This time, no one rushed to leave. They waited, not because of fear, not for a fight, but for Sarai. Because today, she wasn't walking alone. It started with Chloe. She stood just outside the front entrance of the school, her arms folded, not defensively, not like before. She stood with her shoulders back, eyes calm, like someone who had finally decided to stop running from her own shadow. And then Madeline joined her. Then Blake. Silent, bruised, but present. Damien came too. Headphones around his neck, his usual smirk replaced with something quieter. They didn't speak, they just stood, waiting. Dory stepped through the doors, her backpack slung casually, braid over one shoulder. She paused for a second, reading the air like she always did, sharp, instinctive. Then she saw them, and something softened. Her steps were steady as she approached. She didn't look down. She didn't raise her chin. She just moved like the world no longer needed to be a battlefield. She stopped and fronted them, slowly opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was Blake who spoke first, eyes downcast. We were wrong. Words. But they weighed more than all the noise that had come before them. Sarai looked at him, then at the others. She nodded once and said quietly, "I didn't need you to be perfect. I just needed you to stop pretending I wasn't real." Then she kept walking. But this time, they walked with her, all of them, not as a parade, not as followers, but as equals. Each step a small act of apology. A moment later, something even more unexpected happened. Students began falling in beside them, first in twos, then in groups. No one said it. No one planned it. But suddenly the courtyard was full, not loud, not chaotic, not just full. And in that fullness was something Madison West hadn't held in years. Unity, not the forced kind, not the painted-on version for school spirit rallies. but the kind that comes from witnessing someone stand alone long enough that it teaches you how to stand with them. As a crowd moved slowly forward down the sidewalk, shoulder to shoulder, Sarai did something she'd never done before. She took off her hoodie. The act was simple, but the meaning? Unmistakable. She no longer needed to hide. And as the sunlight caught the gold thread on the back of her t-shirt, the words, "Fight Quiet," printed in faint letters. Chloe, walking beside her, whispered almost without thinking, "You didn't need a throne. You had to back up the night." And that was it. That was the moment. The day no one watched Sarai walk away. Because this time they walked with her. The Monday after the walk, Madison West felt like a different school. Not because the lockers changed color. Not because the teachers taught better. But because the silence in the halls had turned into something else. Into awareness. Into space. Into room for more than just survival. Sarai James arrived as she always did. Early, quiet, alone. But when she passed through the front doors, there was something on the bulletin board she hadn't seen before. Not of her face, but of her back, walking away, and around her, a crowd walking too. Underneath, written in black ink, "We don't follow leaders, we follow courage." Sarai stared at it for a long moment, then walked to her locker, opened it, and reached inside. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, the same one that had first been taped to her locker weeks ago. "Thank you," he thought. She smiled. Not wide, not bright, but real. That afternoon, she packed her gym bag with quiet hands. Her father, Darius, leaned against the kitchen doorway. He didn't speak at first. He rarely did when the moment was full. Then he said, "You change something without ever raising your voice." Sarai looked up. "I wasn't trying to change anything," she replied. "I was just trying to make it through." Darius nodded slowly. Sometimes that's exactly how change starts. The next day, she stood at the edge of the gym once more, not to fight, not to prove, not to teach. Coach Reyes had asked her to show the girls' team some footwork drills. Sarai hesitated, then said yes. Now, she stood barefoot on the polished court. Sun flooding in from high windows. Girls lined up, eyes fixed on her. She moved with the grace of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to give. Slide, pivot, grounded. Then she turned to them, her voice clear. "It's not about being the strongest. It's about knowing who you are when no one's watching." The gym held its breath, and for the first time, Sarai let herself breathe with it. Senior year ended months later. Graduation caps flew into the air, applause, hugs, camera flashes. Sarai didn't walk to the front. She didn't stand on a stage. But in the crowd, someone called her name. A younger student, one who had never spoken to her before, ran up, panting, holding out a notebook. Inside, a drawing. Sarai, walking forward, a shadow behind her. But the shadow was not fear, was a bridge, drawn out of charcoal. Sarai took the notebook and whispered, "Keep building it." Then she turned and walked away. One last time, not because she was leaving, but because her story would stay behind. It didn't end with applause. It ended with a soft nod, a drawing passed between hands. A girl taking off her hoodie, not to surrender, but because she didn't have to hide anymore. That was the quiet power Sarai James carried. The kind that doesn't demand attention but creates space. The kind that doesn't ask to be remembered, but refuses to be forgotten. Madison West will never be the same. Not because of one fight, but because one girl refused to let silence mean defeat. And now what follows? Healing, yes. Rebuilding, absolutely. But more than anything, bearing witness so that the echoes of racism, cruelty, and control don't fade into memory, but become a lesson carved into collective truth. The most important message this story leaves behind. We don't always get to choose how we are seen, but we do get to choose how we carry ourselves in the face of that gaze. Sarai never set out to be a leader. She didn't need a podium or a following. Her power was in choosing dignity over rage, stillness over spectacle. She proved that justice sometimes begins, not in protest, but in presence, not in shouting, but in standing still, that a bridge can be built quietly, stone by stone, by those willing to walk alone long enough to show others the way. And for those of us who've lived long enough to know how loud the world can be, perhaps we understand this better than anyone. Sometimes it's the softest voices that last the longest. If this story moved you, share it. Let Sarai's courage echo further. Subscribe to Racist Stories Uncovered to follow more true stories that demand justice, awaken empathy, and restore hope. Because when we witness each other, really witness, the world begins to change. We're honored to have you here. Stay with us as we continue this journey, one story at a time. Warm and late. The Racist Stories Uncovered team.